All I need is a speech. Could I have my remarks, please? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I always like to make the most dramatic entrance possible, so thank you. Minister Mihalovic, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. My thanks to the TGI Group for organizing this event. It's an honor for us to be a sponsor of the conference. There are, as the Minister just set out, many dynamic developments in the property and infrastructure sector in Serbia, with a number of very interesting projects that will serve Serbia well in the future. And we believe that there is a role for Canadian companies to play in developing those opportunities. Canadian companies have expressed an interest in several sectors in Serbia, including public transit, rail transport, road infrastructure, smart city, and energy infrastructure. And we're also interested in exploring the potential for cooperation in social infrastructure, for example, in hospitals. And through this conference and other initiatives, the Embassy is raising awareness of Canadian capabilities and interest in the real estate and infrastructure sectors. To support our cooperation, Canada and Serbia has a full suite of commercial agreements. Of special note is the Strategic Economic Cooperation Agreement, or SECA, which is a framework agreement through which our two governments, for Canada it's on behalf of the Canadian Commercial Corporation. Through that agreement we're able to pursue contracting for public investment projects. The Export Development Corporation is another government arm which is active in this region and in supporting Canadian businesses, and we're very pleased that there's a representative of EDC here today who will be speaking at the session this afternoon. The EDC provides support to Canadian exporters and investments and their international buyers. It also supports Canadian direct investment and investment into Canada. But you'll hear more about that this afternoon. The session this afternoon will also focus on public-private partnerships, or PPPs, which was a particular interest for us in this conference. So we have in Canada a well-developed tradition of cooperation between the government and the private sector to carry out large property and infrastructure development. And that is, we're not unique in that respect, of course, in the world, but we do have the peculiarities of having a very big country with a lot of geography and not many people in the geography. We are also sitting on top of the world's largest market, which tends to draw the attention south. And if you go back through our history in terms of the creation and building of our country, the government played an important role to ensure that the transportation and connections were east-west. And so the government has always played a very big role in building and maintenance of infrastructure in Canada. For example, compared to our neighbors to the south, where there would have been a stronger private sector involvement. Our constitutional structure as well has given us a certain approach to infrastructure development, because we have federal, provincial, and municipal levels which have very distinct constitutional responsibilities for the delivery of infrastructure and dealing with property matters. And this is not just a question of devolved powers without financing. This is complete control over certain elements of infrastructure, particularly in the delivery of health and in most transport services. The Canadian companies are key players in the infrastructure plans that all levels of government are developing. And because of these various elements, they've developed the knowledge and expertise with respect to working with the public sector that make them world-class companies able to tackle infrastructure projects of all types and sizes. And the Government of Canada recently has committed to investing in our infrastructure. In the 2016 budget, they announced that more than $120 billion will be invested in infrastructure over the next 10 years. That's to cover public transit, social infrastructure, and green infrastructure. I'd also like to say a few words, as I said earlier, about the PPPs. You'll hear more this afternoon, and I think it will be interesting because you'll hear experiences of companies that are actually involved in PPPs in arrangements in Canada. And I suspect that you're going to hear the good, but you're also going to hear some of the challenges that this type of arrangement can pose. But the Government of Canada has committed to supporting the P3 or the PPP model. It actually has created an agency called PPP Canada, not very original, but that's what it's called, which is a federal crown corporation with an independent board of directors. And we've created our model for PPPs based on the experiences of many of our bilateral partners, as well as from working within multilateral fora such as the G20 or the OECD. And we think we now have a well-developed model for PPP procurement that we have seen replicated in some other countries and which we think is effective. Certainly that model is the heart of long-term infrastructure plans that are introduced by Canadian governments. Some of the results of this PPP approach, my apologies, is we have a much more efficient procurement process than we did in the past. The average time for procurement has decreased in the last several years. Again, this is not 100% the case, but in general, the average time for procurement has gone down. Bid costs in Canada are lower than in comparable markets, and we attribute this again to the process, if nothing else to the standardization of the process that the PPP model has put in place. So in 2015, we had about $14 billion in PPP projects, which is a record year for us. That was largely in part because we saw a number of projects that were worth more than $1 billion coming on stream. But the rise in the average cost of the projects is an indication of how effective the model has been and how much it is being used. So there are about 200 PPP projects in various phases of development and procurement at the moment. Traditionally, these have been in hospitals, courthouses, or schools, or road projects, but they're increasingly including water, wastewater treatment, transportation, public transit, etc. So the range of projects included is expanding. And one point, without getting into the arcane detail of Canadian constitutional issues, is that a lot of the driving force for the development of the PPP model is actually at the provincial level. It's not necessarily at the federal level. As I said earlier, the provinces are responsible for the delivery a lot of what we would call infrastructure, whether it's transport or health, etc. And many of the ideas, many of the laws, the legislation, the practices have actually come up to the federal level from the provinces as compared to the federal level dictating to the provinces how to do it. But the key words for us when it comes to PPP are focusing on value for money for taxpayers, working through specialized government agencies, and working with a strong capital markets, having a strong legal framework within which to work, and relying on private sector expertise and capacity. So I look forward to hearing from my Canadian colleagues on their experiences in this afternoon's session, and I look forward to hearing the deliberations of the other sessions during the day. So again, my great thanks to TGI International Group for organizing this conference, and I wish you a good day of deliberations. Thank you.